Welcome to Bipolar She. I'm your host, Janine Noel. Bipolar She is a storytelling podcast about living with mental illness. The content of the show may include stories of suicidal ideation and suicide. At the show's website, bipolarshe.com, I've listed ways to find support. If you ever need immediate help, please dial 988, a suicide and crisis lifeline. I believe in the healing power of writing and speaking about our darkest of days in raw detail. So let's go. Today I'm speaking with Graham Wiseman of Being Well, California, a nonprofit dedicated to improving student mental health. Being Well's mission is to bring attention to anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation affecting students, faculty, and parents. After struggles with depression that started in middle school, Colin, Graham's son, lost his battle when he died by suicide at the age of 15 in 2013. Graham formed Being Well California, and their project to create student wellness centers in schools has been a statewide success. Stick around at the end of the show to learn more about a current license plate project, and to learn more, please visit beingwellca.org. Thank you so much for coming out to the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And I know this is hard, and I'm sorry that this loss has brought us together.
Yes.
So I'd really love to just learn a bit about Colin.
All right. So Colin was a really bright boy, and one that people would often say kind of an old soul, and that there was some wisdom that shouldn't have been in a little elementary school boy of people, of situations, how to talk to people. But he was struggling. He was struggling with anxiety. He was struggling with ADHD. And as often happens, when someone is struggling, other people kind of pull away. But with him, people were drawn to him. He was, he was a bright light that people came to. But he was really struggling. And something I learned much later on was a lot of people have shared that people with that personality, with great empathy, often are taking on other people's pain without addressing their own. And I feel that was really a part of Colin's life, was that he was taking on a lot of people's pain, them sharing, confessions of troubles that were going on at home or relationships and so forth. And that he was a compassionate soul. He would listen.
So he had battled depression since middle school?
Actually, in elementary school. I think the third day of third grade, the teacher called us in and said, we're seeing these behaviors. And we're like, okay. And as he progressed through elementary school, I'll never forget that we were asking for an IEP, individual education plan for him, because he was very bright. He scored top marks on tests, but he didn't do homework. And they were grading him on homework. And, our questions back to the school were, he's showing he mastered the skill, he's demonstrated he understands the lesson. You're just giving him busy work, and that's not working for him. Can we do something else? And as we met with the school psychologist and the counselor and the couple teachers and so on, we had asked the daycare director to come in from Marywood next door. And a wise lady, as we sat through this discussion about what to do with Colin, how to help him and so forth, we walked outside and she said, I've been to a couple hundred of these. And there's something you need to know, is that if I was stuck on a desert island, the one person I would want with me is Colin, over my own children, because of how he understands life and drives himself and was supportive of other people. And so when we lost him a few years later, we mentioned that at his memorial, that he had earned this Bonnie Award of being a kind, compassionate soul. So that's what I want people to remember of him. Those who met him, really, he was funny. He was very caring, really smart kid, but he just didn't follow the track that they were supposed to be in.
And so he was at Akalani's.
Yes. So he went to Acalanes High School. And then as a sophomore, we had him, he was getting, therapy advice. He was on medication. And at that point, as parents, we felt we were doing the right thing. We were supporting him. We were, listening to what the doctors were saying. But what we didn't know was just how much pain he was in. And then we lost him in January of 2013.
And just 15 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very, a trauma like that doesn't ever go away. You don't ever get over it. It is always there, just below the surface, just percolating along. And all you do is get better at dealing with it. And so that's what my wife and I had been working on this whole time. It's been 11 years since we lost him, and it's still there. It's right below the surface. I heard an analogy that helped me in dealing with this, and that was to picture yourself on the Bonneville Salt Flats. And there's 2 to 3 inches of water just above that salt. And as you're walking along, you're heading towards the mountains, you think you're walking forward, and then suddenly you'll drop into an icy cold pit of water. It's dark. You don't know how far it is to the other side. You don't know how hard it's going to be to fight your way back up to the surface. And eventually you do. You reach the other side and you pull yourself out and you take a breath, and you may only get one more step before you fall into the next one. But over time, you learn to see where they are and stop and step to the side, and just, they're still there, and they're just as deep and just as cold. But you're just doing a better job of managing the grief of going around them.
And so early on, when he passed away, what were some things that people offered you, or what out there helped with your grief?
What I learned is everybody processes grief in a different way, and there is no right or wrong way. And so I'm always cautious when I share. This worked for me, and it may be the worst thing for you. Just know that. So so my wife and I, the day we lost Colin, the first call was to my dad. Second call was to 911. And the third call was to a family friend, a fireman here in town. And then we just kind of held on to each other and held on to a little girl. And one of her friends was over that night. So we just held on to everybody and said, we're going to get through this. We didn't know how, but our church brought 2 people to our home that had lost someone to suicide. And for me, that was the most important conversation that day, to meet somebody who had been through what I was fearing, the future, and could share that I could make it. So for me, that was the most helpful. For my wife, her track, we went to counseling. So the local crisis center had a group for parents who had lost children, a very specific group. And in it were just what it sounded like. And so we learned of their losses and how they had dealt with it. But after a while, I started to think, boy, they're still going here 5 years later. I don't want to be here in 5 years. And I've got my own trauma. I don't want to live their trauma. So that was me just saying it's okay to be selfish. And I stopped going. And my wife went for a little bit longer. But for her, it was very helpful to share her trauma with other people where she knew she was safe. And she read all kinds of books that people had written who had also lost a child. And she found those helpful. To me, they were destructive. It was not the right thing for me. So I just, those are same event, 2 different perspectives on how people dealt with it.
And how did Being Well come together?
A few months after losing Colin, a couple parents from the high school contacted me, and they were saying, I hope this isn't too soon. And they were very courteous about it. But one had a daughter with severe anxiety, who'd been out of school for about 6 months. And another one had a daughter who had struggled with, battled successfully leukemia through middle school. And they just asked, how was the high school? I'm like, well, not very good. I may use some stronger words. But worse than the high school was how the middle school dealt with the loss and what our little girl was going through while she was trying to process this. So we came together. We compiled a list of like 70 things that we felt the schools were not doing well. And then we went out and looked at other school districts in Northern California, one similar to ours. And we thought, well, what are they doing? It's one thing to just complain, but it's another thing to actually come with a well thought out solution, a plan. And so that's what we did. We took our time, we did these visits, and we came back to our high school board and said, here's the problem, which was suicide ideation at our school was 24%. So that's from the California Healthy Kids Survey, and that was 24% of kids had seriously thought about taking their life in the last 12 months. And the state average was 15. So it was quite a bit higher than the state. We presented the concept of wellness centers that all these other schools had, along with how it's funded, job titles, what would cost the district, all the kind of nuts and bolts that go together with it. And our pleas fell on great ears that were willing to hear, willing to take this, acknowledge it was an issue, and that we could do better. And after 4 years, we opened the first wellness center at Los Lomas High School. And then Camp Lindo, Acalanes, Vermonte, and then the continuing education school. So all campuses have wellness centers now. And they're staffed by district personnel. And there is a new methodology of dealing with kids coming back from home and hospital. I mentioned that the two other parents. And the process at the time was that you were unenrolled from the school you were at and enrolled in the home and hospital program. And what that meant was you couldn't go onto that school campus because you're no longer a student. And so there was no transition. You were either in or out. And so what we were able to do is convince the district that it is not against ed code, that they could do it, and they did. So now a student can be in the home and hospital program, but also come on campus just to do their bio labs so that they can make sure they have the requirements for getting into a UC system, whereas before that had been shut off.
So this home and hospital program, is it for students that were in mental health facilities?
Originally, when that program first was initiated, it's for kids who broke their legs skiing. It was you hurt and you couldn't come back to school. But what has happened as the student population has changed is that now 85% of them are in there for mental health issues. And they may not have been hospitalized, but they can't be on campus. And so it's trying to give them the skills and so forth to get back into the education stream instead of being completely knocked out. And so the success of working with those parents, with the school district, and putting wellness centers in the schools is what led to BeingWell being formed. We then went on to neighboring school district, and they committed to putting 30 wellness centers in. And then we realized that all the school districts we were dealing with were from affluent communities, and we wanted to address that by trying to find a way to fund wellness centers in less affluent communities, because we think all kids need that, equal access.
So ideally, how did the wellness centers function?
The outline that we started with was that they were adjacent to a counseling center. So they would have a private entrance so that, there's still a lot of stigma with acknowledging a mental health challenge. And so for students to be able to enter that where it didn't look like they were going into the wellness center was a real bonus for them. The structure involved the first person they meet, an intake specialist, that's just going to ask them, hey, you okay? And what they're determining is they're triaging the student. Do you need just 10 minutes to pull yourself together? Do you need 10 minutes and then a counselor to talk to you? Do we need to schedule an appointment for you to come back in? So they're just assessing what requirements might be there within the student. And, most of the time it really is just 10 minutes to just calm down and then get back in school. One of the major reasons we pressed for this to be on campus is that we don't want it to disrupt the kids' education. And that can sound a little mean, but they're there to learn. And if we can give them a break, help them through a difficult time, and they can continue to learn, that's going to help them in their life. If we pull them out of school, we're not helping them that much to continue. And for some students, that is the appropriate thing to do. But when it's broken into 3 tiers. Tier 1 being many, tier 2 being, most, and tier 3 being a few. And so we view wellness centers as addressing the many, letting all the students know, yeah, you're going to have a hard time. Things come up. People in your family may pass. There's accidents and deaths and bad test scores, all kinds of things, breakups and so forth. So just help them deal with those life events.
And so you've been in many districts now.
Yes. Not only here in the Bay Area, but throughout California, and working with folks down in San Bernardino, Orange County, San Diego County, Fresno County, Kern, all over. Because mental health doesn't recognize socioeconomic status. It doesn't recognize any of those things that we place on people. It can affect everybody.
Beyond the student centers, what else can we be doing right now for youth mental health?
What we feel is that there are 3 legs of mental health support. And those 3 are required to help a student have a good base. And what we see is that right now, our students that are engaged in self-harm, that are really struggling, those rates are up about 40% since COVID. So this is really coming home now. And the students that lose their lives often feel alone, they feel abandoned or isolated. And some of those are key things to look for when a child is, withdrawing and so forth. So it's important to include students, and that inclusion is broad. Things like having sports, a drama club, a wellness center, as we're focusing on. But all of those things are important for student mental health. And the 3 legs are students, parents, and educators. We run into a lot of initiatives that include 2, but rare do we find that they include all 3. And we know that, they're at school 8 hours a day, but then they're at home. So if you're doing a lot of work at school and not doing anything at home, you've not built a stable platform.
So for parents, how do they work with school faculty and psychologists?
That's a tough question. And it's a tough question because, like, school psychologists are completely overwhelmed. You pull one aside and when they're not wearing their school hat, and they'll just say, I've got way more students than I can talk to. I've got way more I need to talk to, and I can't take any more on. And so it's very difficult for them, knowing how much they've already got on their plate, to say, yeah, I'll talk to a new parent. It's a difficult thing. I understand their pain. So is it getting more psychologists or helping get community organizations involved for them to be referenced out to? I think that's a part of it. But if, as a parent who has a child that's struggling, it's important to understand that you are their chief advocate and that nobody else is going to fight as strong as you are. So if somebody is not completely on board, look for another person, look for another avenue to get your child to help, because they're only young once. And there are tremendous resources out there. And as a parent, it can be overwhelming. In my presentations at the end of it, I go, oh, look, I have resources. And it's completely filled with all kinds of websites and different, wonderful organizations. And then the next slide is even more resources. And look, I've got a page 3 of there's so many resources. It's very hard for a parent and even more for a student to sort their way out. So it's finding a guide, finding someone to help you go through it, and understanding that schools they're facing a tremendous difficulty of their own. And so they can't necessarily really help your child more than just saying, well, we'll keep an eye on them.
So you have some projects going on right now.
Yes.
I'd love to hear about them.
Oh, yeah. So I'll start with our newest one, which is a program called Handle with Care. So that is a program that started in West Virginia. And what got me interested in it was my wife, who had been a just retired school teacher for 35 years, had a student, a little 3rd grader, that just couldn't hold it together one morning. And she went over and gave her a hug and said, what's going on? And there had been a fire at her apartment. So she'd been dropped off at school, and her clothes still smelled like smoke. So my wife's like, oh, I give her some care today. And at lunch, she shared this. Another teacher's popped up their head and said, wait a minute, I have her sister, and I benched her because she was acting out in class, and I thought she was really, being disruptive. I wish I'd known. So when that story was shared with me, I'm like, wait, I've heard that slogan somewhere before. In all the, conferences and stuff I'd been to. So I went back and found that Handle with Care is in 45 other states. It's in 9 other counties in our state, and we don't have it here. So I partnered with Stanislaw Office of Education to present it here in Contra Costa. Contra Costa County Behavioral Health gave us a grant to pilot this program in Richmond and in San Ramon. And what the program does is it allows law enforcement, when they are at an event, a crisis event, and they notice school-aged children, they collect their name, what school they go to, and the date of birth, just to make sure you've got the right student. Then a notification is sent to the school, handle this child with care. That's the only information that's conveyed. And what Being Well does is we go to those schools and train the teachers and administrators what to do when they receive that. And it is not rush up and hug the child. It is just to observe, just to look to see that perhaps they're processing this just fine. But in case they're not, you can know why. And if they're acting up in class, you're going to know, they had a tough time last night, whatever it was, I'm going to give them a break. So that's the Handle with Care program, kind of in a nutshell. And we're really looking forward to it. We're hoping that over the next 5 or 6 years will spread throughout the entire county, and we'll have that program in place. And then the larger event is kind of harkening back to what we did with the wellness centers, was seeing that funding gaps and the inequity throughout our state of students who were struggling but weren't able to get resources. So we started a campaign for a mental health awareness license plate here in California. We always believe, remember those three legs? So we believe that, for students, nothing about us without us. So we went to students and said, we're going to run a statewide contest for the design of this license plate. And we collaborated with the California Association of Art Instructors. And off it went. And a few months later, we collected all the designs. And it was just inspiring. It was inspired. There was full-on CAD designs down to crayon on binder paper. And in it were these emotions and messages that these young people felt were important and needed to get out. Our instructions were pretty simple. Here's the requirements the state has on what a plate has to look like, and it has to be cool. It has to be something you want to put on your back of your car when you get one. And the winning design came out of a student in San Ramon Valley Unified at Doherty Valley School. And when we asked her about it, met with her, and she said, mental health is so often portrayed as a negative. We all have it, and you can have good mental health. So her expression of, and she wanted it to be, joyful, that, there is hope, there is help out there for good mental health. So that is our long-term campaign. We've been working on it for 5 years. The average time for a plate like this is 8 years. So we're actually doing pretty good. And our state sponsor is the California Department of Education. So we've had outstanding support from our state superintendent of public instruction, Tony Thurman, who's a Contra Costa kid. His kids go to school here in Contra Costa County. So he's like, yes, we're in 100%. Let's make this happen. And that's encouraging, because a big part of it is just awareness. People don't, if it's a small organization that's leading the campaign, it's very hard for people to be aware of it in the state. There's no help from the DMV on meeting a preliminary order of 7,500 registrations. Once you have that, then it goes into production. And so far, there's never been a specialized license plate that's going out of production. So it will be a fundraiser for the Department of Education. The money is funding resources for wellness centers on schools throughout our state. Our hope is that as we continue, will help define what we see as best practices for wellness centers, like the submissions for the license plate. Every school district, and there's over 1,000, have different ideas of what a wellness center should be like. And so we want to help kind of coalesce that to, these are some good standards that we think everybody should strive to attain.
Are the wellness centers for high school, junior high, and even elementary schools?
Yes. Yes. So our start was in high schools. And we realized that very quickly that middle school is where a lot of these problems start to come up. But since then, we've actually kind of seen that elementary school is where they really start to bubble to the surface and are often kind of held off because, children are going through all kinds of different phases. And it's easy to say, it's a phase, or, they're just adjusting to this, or maybe it's a slight learning disability, but nobody wants to say my child has a mental health issue because of the stigma. So recognizing that it is in elementary school where we need to be kind of identifying kids who need help is difficult for people to understand.
So looking forward to anyone listening today, what do you suggest that we do to help youth, have good, strong mental health?
Excellent question. And I'm glad you asked it that way because I really want to end on a really hopeful note. There's so many statistics out there that can bring us down and seem, like there's, you don't stand a chance, but we do. And there is one secret magic ingredient, and that is to add a caring adult. So that's not just me saying, hey, this is a good idea. There's a Dr. Cheryl King at University of Michigan. She did a study, and she had roughly 400 students who had either made suicide attempts or shown strong suicide ideation. These were high school kids. Cut the group in half. One group got the regular awesome treatment, whatever that may be. The second group got the same awesome treatment, but they introduced a caring adult. The student chose it. And I know for parents, it's always a little bit of a heartbreak. It's usually not the parent. In fact, rarely is it the parent. There's a whole lot of reasons why. But it could be a coach, a faith leader, the bus driver, a neighbor, an uncle, an aunt, someone like that. But having that caring adult in a kid's life is the number one protector for kids' mental health. So if your child is introverted and spends their whole time on a computer screen, try to find some other way to get another adult into that person's life to help break them from that, because that's where the hope is. The hope is, yes, your child will thrive. I ran a survey. I interviewed parents, and it was like an hour and a half series of questions we went through. And I thought I knew the answer. My surveys, the way I designed it, was asking them when you would take a child to a professional. When would you realize that this is something you can't handle as an adult? And that's my intent. It walked away with a completely different answer. And that was that parents will do anything for their child if they know how much they're struggling. And so it's helping parents understand, if you see this behavior, that's an indicator of that. And it's not necessarily a phase or them being rude to you. There's something behind the action that's going on there. And so giving that hope, I think, is critical. Dr. Cheryl King's research ran for 12 years. At the end of the 12 years, she had reduced the student deaths by 660%. No drugs, no side effects, just having a caring adult in that child's life. And that's the secret sauce. That's what we need to find.
Yeah, I read that study. It's just amazing.
Yeah, amazing stuff. And when we share that with professionals, they're like, I want to help more. They're like, I want to be that caring adult, but they can't be for everybody. So it's important to share that
and
out.
We just need to look closely too.
Yeah, when we lost Colin, one of the hardest things is the blame and shame that people come with. There's a lot of people, say, I can't imagine. Well, so we don't want you to imagine. We really don't. We don't want you to be where we are. What we want you to do is focus on how you can help your child. That study I ran, what I walked away with was what parents want for their kids. It was all the same. Once I kind of boiled it down, they want them to lead happy, independent lives. I didn't mention what school they went to. I didn't mention how much they made. I didn't mention where they lived, because that was not important. It was that they were happy and independent. That surprised me, and I've worked towards it ever since, is helping parents understand it's not the grades, it's not the school, it's not what kind of shoes you're wearing. It's, are you happy? And if you're not, let's get you there, because that will pay off.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm really grateful for this experience to speak with you.
Well, my pleasure. And I know it's a difficult topic, and I know it can be upsetting. I try not to let it get too sad, but there are times when I can't stop it from getting sad, when I think about it, and just that a really bright light just got turned off way too soon. Yeah.
I'm glad I got to hear some of his story. California's children are facing heartbreaking challenges with mental health issues. To address this, Being Well California is leading a campaign with the California Department of Education to create a California Mental Health Awareness license plate. The student-designed plate will support youth mental health programs in the state. With an estimated project cost of $850,000, just 10 individuals, companies, or organizations could make this initiative a reality, and every donation plays a crucial role during this critical time. Visit BeingwellCA.org today to create a legacy for generations to come. Let's bring mental health into the light, even if just a traffic light.